I have had this YouTube channel for over 5 years now, and one of the common themes that I've been talking about is how the Asian comic book market is basically giving DC and Marvel Comics all the answers, but they continue to ignore what manga and manhwa are doing. Mostly we talk about manga, but you definitely can't ignore manhwa, basically manga from Korea. They're absolutely dominating the world comic book market. It's not even close. There was actually an article recently from EuropeComics.com talking about specifically European comic book publishers in comparison to their Asian counterparts. Not so much about DC and Marvel, but there was a graphic that got a lot of people's attention. In fact, a handful of people actually reached out to me and said, you need to talk about this. Well, I've been talking about it, but this is a great illustration, and I do like it when people outside my sphere are looking at problem sets and seeing the exact same thing I'm seeing, even if they're not actually trying to see that. I always think that's very interesting. I've been screaming from the rooftops, telling the truth for 5 long years now. And I've had detractors try to say, oh, Wes, you're just rage bait. You want to be negative. No. I don't want to be negative. I have to be honest. And if my honesty gives you a negative interpretation of the comic book industry, I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to spin things just to make you feel better. I have to tell the truth. There have been times when things have been said about the U.S. comic book publishing industry, like DC Comics were absolutely going to close down in like 2020 or 2021. I said that was absolutely not true. I actually had sources that I had talked to that said that was absolute bullshit. I ended up being right. There are other times when people have said things, and I couldn't, for matter of fact, say 100% there's no way that's actually happening. But I was able to look at the problem set with the information available and say, in all likelihood, that is absolutely not happening, because if you look at this other data, that doesn't support that. You don't want to believe me. You want to call me a chud. You want to say I'm just a rage baiter. In fact, I'm just a nerd that's really good at research. I just happen to be an intelligence analyst for like 15 years for the United States government, and I'm really good at looking at data and actually pulling out the truth of what's behind the information that you're seeing. So we've been talking about manga absolutely pantsing the U.S. market. This is what the author from Our Korean Webtoons Next Big Things in Comics had to say. In 2018, webtoon app Lazen made the news for garnering more downloads than Marvel or DC for several weeks. That burst of success was followed by continuous growth. Exports, webtoons read online outside of Korea, generated $65 million in 2020. That might be less than 10% of the total webtoon market, but it's a 41% increase from 2019. At this rate, within a couple of years, Korean digital comics exports could top $100 million. So you mean that we've been able to see this problem for 5 years now, that this information was coming out in 2018, that there were metrics out there that were saying DC and Marvel Comics were lagging behind? That wasn't for me. I didn't generate that headline. In fact, that was the media in Seoul, South Korea, bragging about pantsing DC and Marvel Comics. They don't even brag about it anymore because it's not an uncommon occurrence. DC and Marvel do not compete with Asian comic books anymore. This is what the South Korean media had to say in 2018. Lazen Entertainment Incorporated, which operates a major online comic platform, said Monday its service topped the list of best grossing applications on the U.S. Google Play market. Seoul-based Lazen said the performance is significant as it outpaced traditional comic giants such as Marvel Comics and DC Comics. Lazen Comics, which first tapped into the U.S. market in 2016, said it raked in 6.6 billion won, also known as $6.18 million, from the market last year. These guys have only been playing in the U.S. comic book market for 7 years now, and they've already lapped DC and Marvel Comics, who have been operating for 80 years now. You want to tell me everything is great? Does it feel like everything is great in the U.S. comic book market? But honestly, hey, listen. How would Marvel and DC even know this stuff was happening? What are they supposed to keep tabs on all the stuff happening within their own industry and be aware of trends in the way that their consumers are actually behaving, or the consumers that they would like to be behaving? Well, yes, you would, generally speaking, expect that from DC and Marvel Comics. It probably doesn't even matter to Marvel, right? They're all lauding the success of the MCU, right? The movies are doing great. It doesn't matter if the comic books are great. It doesn't matter if the comic book industry is thriving in North America. It doesn't matter if traditional U.S. publishers are even going to be in business for 5 years. We got a really good Captain America movie or two. We got a pretty cool Iron Man before they killed him off. Everyone liked the Avengers movie, so there's nothing to see here. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost, and now DC and Marvel Comics can't even crack the top 5 when it comes to worldwide comic book sales. In fact, if you combine the sales of DC and Marvel Comics, the traditional giants in the comic book sphere, they wouldn't even make the top 4. They would actually be outside of that. That's how poor they're producing right now in comparison to their peers in Asia. But how could they have seen this? I mean, what were they supposed to be reading, news press releases in South Korea? Well, it just so happens in October of 2019, there was this article from Forbes.com. Surprising new data shows comic readers are leaving superheroes behind. Data was shared in a private industry conference indicating that a massive shift in the comics publishing industry has reached a tipping point. For the first time anyone can remember, superheroes are being outsold in their native medium, American comic books and graphic novels, by other kinds of content, notably kid-oriented fare and Japanese or Japanese-inspired manga. Typically, increases in the overall market are driven by the comic industry's largest 2 companies, Marvel, owned by Disney, and DC, at the time part of AT&T's Warner Media Group, which both publish corporate-owned superhero comics almost exclusively, and together account for about 80% of all comics sold through the direct market. But for the last several years, the trade book channel has become an increasingly significant driver of revenue, gaining double-digit year-over-year increases as comic book store sales have declined. When you add in digital and other channels, direct market sales fell under 50% of the total for the first time since comic shops overtook newsstands distribution in the early 1980s. This is not new information. We saw the signs happening as early as 2018. 2019, it was clear as fucking day. That article was penned by Rob Salkowitz, not exactly the harshest critic of the comic book industry itself. He's not exactly holding DC and Marvel's feet to the fire, if you know what I mean. He was simply pointing out the facts as they are. You might say I get too passionate about these things. You might be able to say that I'm too negative, and sometimes maybe I rant just a little bit too much, but I'm speaking the truth. We've been talking about this for 5 years. Why Marvel and DC Comics were sitting on their hands doing absolutely nothing. The entire comic book industry was taken over by Asian comics. And I have nothing against manga. I have nothing against manhwa. In fact, I love my Shonen Jump app. I like reading manga. But I would like to see American comic books thrive in America. I would like to see the wonderful superheroes that have been the backbone of comic books for 80 years in North America maybe be appreciated somewhere besides a movie theater or a lunchbox. The comic book industry in North America is done. It's over with. They've handed the keys over to Asia, and they're doing nothing about it to fix it. These things have certainly happened in American industry before. We saw the automobile industry being taken over by Japan. There was nothing Ford and Chevy and all the American car manufacturers really could do to compete with the Japanese cars that were coming in, and in even Korea. What happened? Well, Ford decided, well, let me look at what's going on here. Maybe we should actually create cars that can compete with Japanese cars. And yes, there was a big bailout, and Ford certainly took that money. But even before that happened, if you drove a Ford Fusion, you were actually driving a pretty damn good car that had an engine that could last about 250 or 300,000 miles, just like their Japanese counterparts. Because the American automobile industry might be a laughing stock, or at least it was then, but even they were able to look at what was in front of them, the truth of the industry that they were working in for what it was, adapt to it, and actually try to compete. Marvel and DC aren't trying to compete anymore. I think they're just trying to generate headlines about how woke they are. That is pretty much the only thing coming out of Marvel and DC Comics. I've seen this. Perch has seen it. Rob Salkowitz has seen it. Now we've got EuropeComics.com seeing this. Everyone's seeing the truth for what it is. Heidi McDonald still can't see it. The industry's better than it's ever been. Tim Seeley still thinks that he's reaping the benefits of all the sales of manga in North America. But the truth is, this shit is going down, and it's going down fast. A lot of times when these things happen, you see the signs, and then all of a sudden, it's done. It's all over with because they were indicators, but when it finally happened, it happened so fast, you really can't adjust at that point. We might be to the point where even if American comic book publishers like DC and Marvel wanted to compete with manga, they might not be able to. They might be so insignificant at this point, they might have destroyed their reputation so badly over the past 10, 15 years that there might not be any way to get out of it other than somebody buying them, or maybe just stop publishing comic books altogether for 5 or 10 years and let somebody else come in and get a crack once people have gotten over just how bad Marvel and DC comics are right now. But the writing is on the wall. The truth is out there. I've been speaking it from day one here on the channel. In fact, last year, right here on the channel, I talked about how manga sales were absolutely destroying, killing American comic book publishers. All the information is right here. The detailed info that you need. Definitely check this video out. There's also a link in the video description.